Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We begin at the United Nations in New York, where world leaders continue to speak, addressing a wide range of issues, including poverty eradication, reforms within the UN system, and global security and terrorism. Among African leaders who have addressed the UNGA are Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe and Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria. Mr. Buhari, who was addressing the assembly for the first time, called on the world to pay attention to the threat and devastation being caused by Boko Haram in his country and in the entire West African region.
Boko Haram's war against the people of Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and Cameroon may not attract as much worldwide attention as the wars in the Middle East, but the suffering is just as great and the human cost is equally high.
While the world has drastically changed since 1945, the United Nations and indeed the global governance architecture remains mired in a long bygone era. This archaic hierarchy among nations threatens to erode the confidence and support that the United Nations commands among the majority, but disadvantaged of its membership.
Well, Mr. Mugabe decried the exclusion of millions of Africans in the decision-making process of the world body. Well, for more on the United Nations General Assembly, VOA's UN correspondent Margaret Besheer joins us live from New York. Margaret, welcome once again. Now, on the sidelines of the UNGA, of course, there's been a lot happening. Tell us about the South Sudan talks around the UN building.
Yeah, busy day here in New York, Vincent. This morning there was a high-level meeting that the Secretary General chaired on South Sudan. He had Riek Machar there, and Salva Kiir joined by a video link from Juba. The Secretary General had some strong words for both the leaders. He said that it's their historical and political responsibility to put South Sudan on a path to peace, and he urged them to implement the peace agreement signed last month without delay. He also urged them not to import arms anymore and to end the suffering of the South Sudanese people. And he said, I hope you will not disappoint us, because the international community has been trying to help you for 4 years. So he was pretty stern with both the leaders.
And rather interesting that actually President Salva Kiir wasn't there in person. The last time he sent Mr. The deputy, who was the deputy president at that time, who is the opposition now, and he did not make it now personally to the UN, right?
Well, interesting, last year Salva Kiir was here in New York and he just didn't show up at the meeting. So that was really sort of an insult to the United Nations, because they've been working so hard for the people of South Sudan, and for the president to snub them that way, it was not seen in a very good light here in New York. But today Vice President James Iga was here, and so he represented the government at the meeting. But Salva Kiir spoke via the video link.
All right, now, again, there's a very important summit that is taking place today, right there. This is on fighting violent extremism. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, President Barack Obama chaired a meeting of the Countering ISIL Coalition, and that's a coalition of about 60 countries. And today he announced that Nigeria, Malaysia, and Tunisia would be joining the coalition. He said that more than 24 countries are contributing military capabilities to fighting ISIL, and he said that the other countries who contribute, bring economic, intelligence, and other capacities to the coalition. So last year, President Obama, when he was here, he chaired a meeting of the UN Security Council that adopted a resolution on fighting foreign terrorist fighters, fighting the flows of foreign terrorist fighters, and trying to stem financing to them. This year it was sort of a assessment meeting, I would say, to see where the gaps are and where they need to make improvements. And over 100 countries attended the meeting. There were representatives from civil society and other groups, private sector as well, at this meeting.
You know, President Buhari, Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria did speak earlier in the bite we used, and they said Boko Haram may not be catching the attention of many in the world. Is that the kind of vibe you get, that Boko Haram is not a big focus of the international community?
I think it is certainly a focus of the United Nations here. But I'll tell you, President Buhari spoke at the Countering ISIL meeting, and he said because Boko Haram wasn't getting the attention they wanted, they joined up, they pledged their allegiance with ISIL, and they did that in March of this year. And he said that he interpreted that as an indication that Boko Haram's operational capacities had been hurt by the Nigerian military and the joint multinational task force of the Lake Chad Basin region by their efforts to stop Boko Haram. So he thought they were, linking themselves with ISIL to get more attention.
Now, Margaret, finally, what can we expect in the remaining part of this day and the coming days?
Well, more speeches today in the General Assembly Hall, and tomorrow there's going to be an important meeting that the Secretary General is chairing on the issue of refugees and migrants going into Europe. So that's going to be the focus of Wednesday's meetings here, the massive refugee crisis that's going on right now.
A great opportunity, too, for leaders who would otherwise never hang out together to be kind of sitting around a table and talking, right?
No, well, they say that the UN Ministerial Week, the Secretary General has over 230 engagements this week, and there's hundreds of bilateral meetings. It's a great opportunity for world leaders to see each other and meet, and as we know, last night, President Obama and Mr. Putin took advantage of that opportunity, and they met for an hour and a half. And for those two leaders, it was their first formal meeting in more than a year.
Indeed, and we're going to talk a little more about that. Thanks a lot, Margaret, for your excellent reporting as usual. Enjoy New York.
Thanks for having me, Vincent.
Well, Margaret Besheer of Voice of America reporting live from the UN in New York. Now, finding the best way to combat terrorism is high on the agenda for many of the world leaders attending the UNGA this week in New York. On Tuesday, U.S. President Barack Obama delivered remarks at the summit on countering ISIS and violent extremism at the UN headquarters.
There are going to be successes and there are going to be setbacks. This is not a conventional battle. This is a long-term campaign, not only against this particular network, but against its ideology.